Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Sid Alpha and welcome to this week's Line of Sight, the exclusively Games weekly news roundup. Now, I can't help but notice over the past several weeks that the other videos on this channel, Rags Reviews, is earning more views than the Line of Sight series. Now, I get it, I do. Everyone loves dogs, and on top of that, he's a talking dog that not only reviews games, but reviews them well. It's rather difficult to compete with that when it's a news roundup series that talks about stories over the past week as opposed to current topics. I understand that the love of bacon is nowhere near as strong for some of you as the love of dogs, but I'm an arrogant man who thinks that he needs to do the best to always be the best whenever he possibly can. So on that note, I would ask each and every one of you to feed my ego-fueled machinations for bacon-induced world domination by making sure to share the Line of Sight videos on your favorite social media platform, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, or Reddit. That is, if you think I do a good enough job to warrant the extra effort. If I haven't earned it, then the onus is on me to improve to the point where I do. Also, if you do enjoy this content, don't forget to check out Rags Reviews on this channel. They're pretty great. And also don't forget to check out the website exclusively games.com for daily news articles that focus on video games and not ideologically based editorialization. Link is in the description below. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's see what's on the list for this week. Tim Sweeney defends Epic Store exclusives, G2A advertisements overriding an indie developer on Google search rankings causing severe financial concerns, and Electronic Arts blames gamers for Anthem's failure. I know this is a very short list of topics for this week, but there's a lot of talking points to go through here, so that said, now that we're all queued up, let's get started. Now, Epic Games and Epic exclusives. Long has this topic been a focus of the public consciousness within video games. The reason for this is due to the inherent anti-consumerism behind paid distribution exclusives, along with greed being attempted to be passed off as altruism thrown into the blender along with an incomplete storefront, and several incidents that have given rise to very real concerns about the safety of private data. Toss all of those into a blender and hit frappe, and you'll have where a lot of gamers currently stand in relation to the Epic Store. Recently, Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney took to Twitter to defend the decisions that Epic Games have been making in regards to Epic Store exclusives, and while there is enough information here for me to opine on for quite some time, I try to avoid too much editorialization in these videos, so let's instead go through what Tim Sweeney had to say. He starts, "This question gets to the core of Epic's strategy for competing with dominant storefronts. We believe exclusives are the only strategy that will change the 70-30 status quo at a large enough scale to permanently affect the whole game industry. For example, after years of great work by independent stores, excluding big publishers like EA, Activision, and Ubisoft, none seem to have reached 5% of Steam's scale. Nearly all have more features than Epic, and the ability to discount games is limited by various external pressures. This leads to the strategy of exclusives, which, though unpopular with dedicated Steam gamers, do work as established by the major publisher storefronts and by the key Epic Games story releases compared to their former Steam revenue projections and their actual console sales. In judging whether a disruptive move like this is reasonable in gaming, I suggest considering two questions. Is the solution proportionate to the problem it addresses, and are gamers likely benefit from the end goal if it's ultimately achieved?" Tim Sweeney continues, discussing the 30% revenue share implemented by GOG and Steam, where the Epic Games 12% revenue split. Note, the 12% is only if the game was made on the Unreal Engine. If it was not, then the percentage is 18 and not 12, and states one of the intended results is price reduction for gamers as well as increased revenue for developers. Towards that, he said, "Will the resulting 18% increase in developer and publisher revenue benefit gamers? Such gains are generally split among 1. Reinvestment, 2. Profit, and 3. Price reduction. The more games are competing with each other, the more likely the proceeds are to go to 1 and 3. However, there are a few caveats that Sweeney is not including within this estimation. In that, there is a lack of accounting in a few other factors, such as loss in revenue due to customer disgruntlement with the Epic exclusive and how profitable the paid exclusives are in relation to sales lost from those gamers that will refuse to buy on the Epic storefront. There is also the factor of developers potentially taking these exclusivity deals in favor of a guaranteed dollar amount as opposed to a more variable income. There's also no indication that we've seen from any of the games that have taken the paid exclusivity deal that they will be any less expensive for gamers as a result of the larger revenue share. It is possible that some games may eventually release at lower rates, but for the moment it would seem that developers are simply taking the extra money and being thankful for it, and those savings are indeed not being passed down to the consumer. Next up is G2A.com, and a developer who has found themselves outstripped in Google search rankings by the gray market key sellers. G2A has a long and well-documented history of being a terrible platform for both gamers and game developers alike. The core concept of a key reseller site is not necessarily a bad one. Say you see a game bundle on a site like HumbleBundle.com that has 1 or 2 games you actually want, but several games you either don't want or already have. In that scenario, having a gray market site to sell off those keys would be a perfectly legitimate thing to do. However, as with every system that can be used for profit, if it can be abused, it will be abused. Particularly with a company like G2A that has a history of willful ignorance of the law breaking that occurs on their site and instead instituted the G2A Shield, a mob-style protection scheme that quote-unquote ensures a purchase, so if the game key on offer turns out to not be legitimate, then a new one would be provided to the purchaser. This G2A Shield is a monthly service that is notoriously difficult to cancel once ordered. In 2016, TinyBuild, the group behind Hello Neighbor, Pathologic 2, and Swag and Sorcery, released an extremely large blog in which they discussed the financial impact of what was happening to them as a result of the illegal actions taking place through the G2A website, and $450,000 worth of illegitimate keys were sold through the site. The illegality comes in the form of people purchasing bulk quantities of game keys, video game bundles, and game gifts using stolen credit card information, and then selling the game keys on G2A for ridiculously low prices before the chargebacks hit. This issue is so common and so prevalent with G2A that numerous developers have flat out asked gamers that if they're going to buy a game from G2A, just pirate it instead. That way, at least they wouldn't be giving their money to thieves. The developers of Defender's Quest posted a large blog in 2017 which they literally asked people to do exactly that. Now we have Mike Rose, the developer of the sports cycling game Descenders, facing an issue of G2A gray market sellers rising to the top of search rankings for his game due to G2A advertisements on Google. Now in this video, he shows his game in G2A Google advertisements with the added benefit of his being apparently unable or blocked from disabling the G2A advertisements from showing. Now in a follow-up tweet, Mike Rose says, "Please, if you're going to buy a game from G2A, just pirate it instead. Genuinely. Devs don't see a penny either way, so we'd much rather G2A didn't see money either." So Descenders has joined a very long list of distinguished developers who would prefer, if you will not buy the game directly through their storefront, at least pirate it instead, so thieves will not end up profiting from stolen game keys. Our next story involves Anthem being back in the news once again, this time for EA's CEO Andrew Wilson blaming gamers over the game's commercial and critical failure. We know that Anthem has met with severe issues at every level since its launch. As outlined by Jason Schreier of Kotaku, the developers of Anthem had no idea what game they were even making right up until the E3 2018 conference, and the severe lack of management coupled with a reliance on quote Bioware magic instead of focusing on what was important. In a recent interview given to GameDaily.biz, EA's Andrew Wilson discussed Anthem along with loot boxes and some other topics. In relation to Anthem, Andrew Wilson had the following to say: "We brought together these two groups of players who were making this emotional value calculation on 2 different vectors. One was traditional Bioware story-driven content, and the other was with this action-adventure type content. About the 30 or 40 hour mark, they really had to come together and start working in on the elder game. At that point, everyone kind of went, oh, hang on a minute. Now the calculation is off. It's off because I've got a friend who sits in this other category of player. They want to play the game a certain way. I want to play the game a certain way. The promise was we can play together, and that's not working very well. Oh, by the way, I'm used to 100 hours of Bioware story and that's not what I got. Or, I expected this game would have meaningfully advanced the action component that we'd seen in games like Destiny before, and I don't feel like it has." He continued later with, "If we believed that at the very core the world wasn't compelling people, if we believed at the very core that the characters weren't compelling for people, or the javelin suits weren't compelling, or traversing the world and participating in the world wasn't compelling, then provided we hadn't made promises to our players, we might not invest further. IP lives for generations and runs in these 7 to 10 year cycles. So if I think about Anthem on a 7 to 10 year cycle, it may not have had the start that many of us wanted, including our players. I feel like that team is really going to get there with something special and something great because they've demonstrated that they can. Within Wilson's statements were the core segments of gamers making, quote, value calculations based upon emotion, and those that played Anthem being from two entirely different subsets for gamers, namely those that wanted a Bioware story and didn't get it, along with those that wanted an evolution on the Destiny model of looter shooter and also did not get what they wanted either. This all falls into the public off the back of a recent and unconfirmed allegation made via the site MMOG Fails, in which it is said on that site, "I was also told that the leadership at Bioware is actually blaming the players, their customers, and the vitriol they spew as the reason of why the game is not selling as well as it should. They are also blaming EA for saying the game can be patched later because of the game-as-a-service model. Neither EA nor Bioware expected the pushback and hostility they received for delivering a product in such an unfinished state while selling it for full price." Whether or not it's true that Bioware actually blamed gamers over the vitriol the game engendered, it is clear that both Bioware and EA have both exhibited an apparent lack of awareness as to why the Anthem launch was a failure. But that's all the time we have for on this week's Line of Sight. Thank you so much for tuning in. My apologies, I did not have a new bacon-based food recipe, or as EA would put it, surprise porcine sustenance mechanic, but I will try to find a new one for next week. In the meantime, if you want to hear more of my voice, you can do so by going to my channel at youtube.com/sidalpha. While you're there, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. That is, if YouTube ever decides to start sending them out to viewers again. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am Sid Alpha, and I'll see you next time.